Good morning, gang. Happy New Year. Onward, upward, huh? Today's about making a fresh start. When you make a fresh start, the first things you got to do is take your bearings. That way you can figure out where you went wrong last year. Now, I had a lot of things in my mind last week. Been through some personal stuff. Been through some global stuff. Been through some local stuff. Lots to think about. Things that have been on my mind. Social constructs. Liberty. What is the individual? Well, I mean, being into the natural law side of things, you've often got to separate the construct from the reality. Now, the obvious case for me was marriage and children versus the state documented version of the same. And it occurred to me that, we don't even understand the origins of these things. We think a husband and a wife are two people who've signed their property over to each other. That's not what it is. In the true original sense of the word, someone was your wife if they birthed your child. And the reason we're called a husband is because in ages past, when we were pastoral people, your husband delivered your baby. Because there wasn't a doctor. And in the more patriarchal societies, there probably was lucky if you had a midwife. And it might sound crazy to modern ears, but when you think about it, a shepherd's got plenty of experience pulling babies out of uteruses. Maybe that's why they're called uteruses. Funny. Similarly, in marriage, from my perspective, is a legal construct emulating real marriage, which is two family trees bonded forever in the offspring, the new people. And I think, now I'm not what you'd call a Christian, but in the Christian sense, that's what they mean by no man can undo what's been brought together there. No legal ruling can change who your genetic parents are. And from there I thought about other things. What's the individual? Well, it's funny. Because in an empirical sense, I don't actually believe in the individual. I believe the individual is a legal construct, a necessary legal construct, don't get me wrong. But you're not really an individual. I mean, for starters, you're here because two other people decided to bump uglies. That's beyond your control. And you've been playing out the consequences of that. That's not a victimology, by the way. That's everybody's human experience. Similarly, equality. There is no equality in reality, nor could there be. We'd all be the same age. We'd all earn the same money. We'd all have the same strengths and the same weaknesses. Right? But if you want a society rather than survival of the fittest, you need this concept of the individual and individual rights for that to occur. But you are far from an individual at the end of the day. We are completely interdependent organisms. We're trans-species interdependent. We need our agricultural animals. We need trade. We need some degree of specialization if we're not just to go back to a very primitive existence. And so we've created this concept of the individual. But just like equality, it's something in reality that's for the courtroom. Just like there is no equality, which is why we had to develop the concept of equality before the law, there's no individual. But we need individuals in the eyes of the law, especially if we want to enact lofty concepts like rights. Rights are also a social construct, but they're one that's come about I guess through thousands of years of the human organism trying to mitigate unnecessary friction in its life cycle. A lot of constructs are necessary and require preservation, but that doesn't mean there's equality between constructs. It's easy to come up with a concept. It's a matter of how that concept then survives when it propagates into the real world, for lack of a better term. So that's just some things on my mind. In a general sense. And I guess the other big thing, being a new year, I guess we got to take stock of where we're at and where we're headed. What's been happening and what it means for the future. And I guess we really have to sort of start to forecast what we think is going to happen next. Now, the new Event 201 apparently has come out last week. This time around, they're talking about polio. And the time frame in the wargaming exercise was 2025. But there's already buzzes about new strains and mystery illnesses going around right now, so who knows? Who knows what they've got actually in store? Exactly. There's layers to this. And a lot of the responses will have been forecast. That's what they use their resources for. Containment and control. And given the nature of things, you know, us in the freedom movement, we've felt cornered, we've felt under pressure, and that means we are easily baited. And, you know, we have to take extra care to not be taken in by things like the general public are. No Andrew Tate fan, but if you've been following that narrative, you'll kind of have a microcosm of what I mean. Turns out it was an activist who sicked the Romanian police on the guy. He was very quickly released after the allegations were dismissed. Yet the mainstream media keeps talking about him being arrested, blah, 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 human trafficking, blah, blah, blah. But I think really that's a response to what his arguments are doing to the narrative. Case in point, if it's still up, I should say. I wouldn't be surprised if it's been deleted. But he was recently on a panel with a woman named Brittany Renner, and I think their interaction actually scares the powers that be in terms of this men versus women narrative that they've been working on for such a long time. I grew up in the 80s and 90s. I remember every radio station in the world had a battle of the sexes competition. This is sort of a Tavistocky approach. They lay the seeds, 10 years later they lay the next lot of seeds, and then they try and harvest the fruits. There's a lot of that going on. A hell of a lot of that going on. If you actually know what's going on in Ukraine and you talk to normies, you have an idea of the disconnected from reality bubble that everybody's in, and the heavy conditioning that goes along with that, which you will encounter anytime you challenge the narrative that these people now are clinging to. A lot of them terrified, a lot of them have had agreed to do things that they now regret. A lot of them are waiting to see if they've really fucked up. And makes people irrational. A lot of effort going into keeping everybody stuck in their amygdala, fight, flight. This push to propagate social and emotional learning on our children will only make them more vulnerable, less resilient, unable to logic their way out of a situation. Because no matter how smart you are, if you run your interpretation of the world through your emotional center before your logic one, you have a garbage in, garbage out problem that 200 IQ points could not circumvent. You're not perceiving the world clearly if you're perceiving it emotionally. And I've come to the conclusion recently that your emotions are just the thoughts of your animal body. And you should listen to it like you'd listen to an 8-year-old kid if you came home to find the house a mess. But don't take it as gospel. Don't let the ox drive the rider, in the Buddhist sense. I like to regard emotions as the breeze. I like to know which way it's blowing. I don't like to let it unseat me from my horse. I suggest you do the same. Ride tall in the saddle. Big year ahead. The rest of the decade's going to be big, so pace yourselves. Don't be rash. Plod along for a bit. Be cautious. Save your reserves. Take stock of your resources, your people networks. And it's New Year's Day, so be honest, be scathing with yourself. Be real. Be as real as you can. Lots of things happening. I think the big fight this year is going to be CBDC, tech censorship, false narratives of domestic terror, and strange silence, particularly from our government here, regarding Russia might be the number one threat to NATO, but the CCP is the number one threat to the Australian people, and our government's awful cozy with those people right now. I don't know if this made the mainstream news, because to be honest, when it comes to news, I'm more likely to be looking at global news than local. I'm tired of this parochial shithole. So yeah, expect more of this kind of crap we've seen in response to this police shooting. Be vigilant. And as always, police your own. You see people giving the freedom movement a bad name, don't be afraid to say something. No matter how many YouTube followers they have or whatever, don't you worry about it. A lot of people are good at the media bit. Doesn't mean, basically, don't fall for the charisma, right? You got to make sure that people are of substance, especially in this day and age. A lot of people are smoke when the rubber hits the road. And a lot of us are untested. We live in a soft and protected environment in the modern world, which is probably the root cause of why we end up putting the legal fictions before the realities a lot of the time. So, if you can do anything about learning natural law concepts, you have to be rabid or dogmatic about it and shit. I highly recommend, as always, a book called The End of All Evil by Jeremy Locke. It's a pen name. Very simple language. A year 8 student could probably understand the concepts in the book. Hey. There's a lot of good things to think about. It'll unseat a lot of basic myths that you hold as universal truths. Of course, there's plenty of other resources. Not just resources, but people. Us in the libertarian wing of the freedom movement, we suffer from terminal individualism sometimes. No man is an island, though, guys. We are an interdependent species, as the wonderful David Goronosky puts it. Interdividuals. Before the law, the individual must be the basic unit of the society, but in reality, it's the family. Families are responsible for everything from new arrivals to the types of adults that they become, to the kind of economies that they support. Having become a father in the last couple of years, I realize how few people have an appropriately long view of the future for their offspring. We've been tricked into the individual importance of ourselves taking primacy when it shouldn't at all. You should be thinking at all times about your great grandkids, not just your kids. You need to take a long view. Some of our enemies have a much longer view than even that. And I think until we can sort of telescope out our time horizon a little bit, we'll constantly be playing catch up with these types. And they're doing everything they can to stop you from changing your worldview to something more appropriate. That's why they always push self-indulgence. That's why the liquor stores were open during lockdown, but not your local bakery. That's why you could go to the brothel and not the church. And it's everywhere. So mind what your kids read, mind what you absorb, mind what the people in your circle are talking about. And possibly more importantly, what are they blasé about? Now, it sounds grim, but a reality check's always the best way to start. New endeavors and new trips around the sun. Happy New Year, everyone. Peace, love, and Kung Fu. Black Eye out.